He wanted nothing to do with me.
After Jerry Lewis died, some of his own sons began speaking publicly about the man they had known behind closed doors. Their stories painted a far more complicated picture than the beloved entertainer millions of fans remembered. To the public, Jerry Lewis was the king of comedy, a performer whose influence stretched across generations. Some even argue that modern comedy would look completely different without him. He helped create a style of physical, unpredictable humor that countless comedians would later build upon. But the man behind the laughter had a darker and far more complicated private life.
I knew I wasn't going to get anything, but the real sticking point, the dagger in my heart.
Jerry Lewis was born on March 16, 1926, into a Jewish entertainment family. His father, Danny Levitch, was a vaudeville performer whose family had roots in the Russian Empire, while his mother, Rachel, was a pianist with roots in Warsaw. Entertainment surrounded Jerry almost from birth, and it didn't take long for him to develop the restless energy and impulsive humor that would eventually define his career. As a teenager, Lewis was constantly playing pranks and getting himself into mostly harmless trouble. More importantly, he was already experimenting with performing. One of his earliest routines became known as the record act. The concept was remarkably simple. A record would play while Lewis stood on stage, dramatically miming the lyrics as though he were actually singing them. At just 15 years old, he managed to land a professional engagement in Buffalo. But the performance failed to impress, and afterward, bookings became difficult to find. For a young entertainer desperate to break into show business, it was a painful setback. For a while, Lewis appeared to leave entertainment behind entirely. He took whatever work he could find to support himself, including jobs as a soda vendor and an usher in New York theaters. Ironically, while helping other people find their seats to watch performers on stage, Lewis was still searching for a way to get back onto one himself. That opportunity eventually came through Max Coleman, an old acquaintance of Lewis's father from his vaudeville years.
Because when I left Jerry, I was more scared than he was, and nobody knew it. But I didn't know what I was going to do.
Coleman encouraged the teenager not to abandon performing and convinced him to give show business another chance. Lewis returned to the stage and began working extensively in the Borscht Belt, the famous collection of resorts in New York's Catskill Mountains that attracted large numbers of Jewish vacationers. These resorts became training grounds for generations of entertainers, forcing young comedians to sharpen their material in front of demanding live audiences. It was there that Irving Kay saw Lewis perform and eventually became his manager. Meanwhile, the Second World War was reshaping the lives of millions of young American men. Lewis might easily have disappeared into military service along with much of his generation, but a heart murmur prevented him from being accepted into the armed forces. That rejection changed the direction of his life. Lewis soon met singer Patty Palmer, and the two fell in love. With both of them coming from entertainment backgrounds, they seemed like a natural match. They married on October 3rd, 1944.
It was not an Ozzie and Harriet life.
The couple would later adopt a son in 1949 before having 5 biological sons during the 1950s. From the outside, Jerry Lewis appeared to be building the perfect American success story: marriage, children, and a rapidly developing entertainment career. Behind closed doors, however, the picture would eventually become much more complicated. As Lewis's fame increased, so did the tensions inside his family. But before those problems became public, Lewis was about to meet the man who would transform his career. Only about a year after his marriage, the 19-year-old Lewis was performing at the Glass Hat Club in New York City.
My mom would get on the intercom and would say, "Your father's home," and we scattered. We could never predict his behavior on a given day.
Another entertainer working there was a 27-year-old singer named Dean Martin. Martin had not yet become the effortlessly cool superstar the world would later know, and at first, there was little indication that these two men were about to create one of the most famous partnerships in entertainment history. It would take roughly another 2 years before they truly joined forces on stage. Lewis was performing at the 500 Club in Atlantic City when a scheduled singer suddenly became unavailable. The club needed a replacement, and Lewis suggested Dean Martin. It sounded like the perfect solution. At first, it was nearly a disaster. Anyone familiar with Martin and Lewis remembers the extraordinary chemistry they eventually developed, but their earliest performances were nowhere near that polished. Their original material simply wasn't working. Skinny D'Amato, the owner of the 500 Club, reportedly became so frustrated that he threatened to throw them out unless they came up with something better.
I mean, the highest. My father was the top box office draw on planet Earth.
Their partnership could have ended almost before it began. Instead, Martin and Lewis abandoned the safe approach. They threw away much of their prepared material and began improvising. Martin would attempt to perform as the smooth, serious singer, while Lewis interrupted him, caused chaos, heckled him, and turned the entire performance into unpredictable comedy. Suddenly, everything clicked. The audience loved the contrast. Martin was handsome, relaxed, and effortlessly cool. Lewis was frantic, childish, disruptive, and impossible to control. One played the straight man, while the other seemed determined to destroy the show around him. What looked like chaos was actually their greatest strength. Once Martin and Lewis discovered that formula, their rise became explosive. They toured clubs along the eastern seaboard, drawing increasingly enthusiastic crowds before eventually reaching New York's famous Copacabana. Their reputation spread quickly, and Hollywood and network executives began paying attention. By 1948, NBC had given them their own radio program, The Martin and Lewis Show, which would continue in various forms until 1953. Jerry Lewis had gone from a teenager whose first professional act failed to a struggling theater usher, to one half of the hottest comedy partnership in America.
Do I let my mother go on the street, or do I sue my father?
But while audiences were falling in love with the chaotic character Lewis presented on stage, another version of Jerry Lewis was beginning to emerge away from the spotlight. And as his fame grew larger, the divide between the beloved comedian the public saw and the husband and father his family knew would become increasingly difficult to ignore. At roughly the same time, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were becoming one of the hottest acts in entertainment. Another television institution was beginning to take shape. Ed Sullivan had launched Toast of the Town, the variety program that would eventually become The Ed Sullivan Show. Martin and Lewis appeared on its very first broadcast, giving millions of viewers an early glimpse of the chemistry that was already electrifying nightclub audiences. They continued appearing on variety programs before attempting something more ambitious in April 1949, television on their own terms. With a successful radio career already developing, Martin and Lewis had every reason to believe television would be another easy victory.
I'm really sorry that I didn't have any one-on-one time with him to express that I love him.
Instead, they discovered that what worked brilliantly in clubs and over the radio didn't automatically translate to the small screen. The early reaction was disappointing. Their frantic interruptions, improvisation, and controlled chaos had made them sensations in front of live nightclub audiences. On television, however, critics weren't immediately convinced. Once again, Martin and Lewis found themselves having to adapt. But television wasn't what would truly transform them into national superstars. Hollywood was. In 1949, Paramount signed Martin and Lewis to a film contract. Their first major movie appearance together came in My Friend Irma, starring Marie Wilson and Diana Lynn as two roommates stumbling through romance and everyday chaos. Martin and Lewis were initially brought in as supporting comic relief, but audiences immediately noticed them. The chemistry that had filled nightclubs suddenly worked beautifully on the big screen. Hollywood had found something enormously marketable. Over the next several years, Martin and Lewis became one of the industry's most profitable comedy teams, eventually making 14 films together between 1950 and 1956. Their formula seemed almost impossible to resist. Martin was smooth, handsome, and relaxed. Lewis was loud, unpredictable, childish, and explosive. But as Jerry Lewis became more powerful, stories began emerging about how fiercely he protected his position. One of the strangest involved a young performer named Sammy Petrillo. Petrillo was 8 years younger than Lewis and bore an extraordinary resemblance to him. He could imitate Lewis's expressions, mannerisms, and frantic comedic style so convincingly that the similarity quickly became part of his act. Lewis reportedly did not find it flattering. He saw competition. Petrillo later recalled being brought into Lewis's orbit and appearing as a baby in a sketch on the Colgate Comedy Hour. According to Petrillo's account, Lewis was abrasive during their interactions, but the younger performer was eventually persuaded to sign with MCA, the same powerful talent agency connected to Lewis. What looked like a major career opportunity soon became something very different. Petrillo claimed that Lewis promised him work that never materialized. From Petrillo's perspective, Lewis wasn't trying to develop his career at all. He believed Lewis wanted him under contract precisely so he couldn't work elsewhere and become a genuine competitor. Because Petrillo was still a minor, his father eventually managed to get him out of the arrangement. But Petrillo didn't disappear. In the early 1950s, he met singer Duke Mitchell, and the two formed their own comedy partnership. The resemblance to Martin and Lewis was obvious. Mitchell played the smooth singer, while Petrillo performed the manic comedic role. Lewis reportedly hated it. Petrillo and Mitchell later claimed that Lewis used his growing influence in the entertainment industry to interfere with their opportunities and make it harder for them to find work. Whether every accusation reflected Lewis's intentions exactly is difficult to establish decades later, but the story contributed to a darker reputation that increasingly followed him. Jerry Lewis didn't simply want to succeed. He wanted to protect his position at almost any cost. Meanwhile, an even more important relationship was beginning to collapse. By the spring of 1956, tensions between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had reached a breaking point. The more successful the duo became, the more attention seemed to center on Lewis. Reporters often treated Jerry as the creative genius of the partnership while portraying Martin as little more than the handsome singer standing beside him. Martin increasingly resented it. Then came an incident that seemed to symbolize everything that had gone wrong. In 1954, Look magazine published a cover featuring Jerry Lewis. The original photograph had reportedly included both men, but Martin was cropped out. For Dean, the message was difficult to miss. The world increasingly saw Jerry Lewis as the star and Dean Martin as replaceable. Their friendship had already been strained by years of exhausting performances, movies, television appearances, and conflicting ambitions. Now the partnership itself was beginning to feel impossible. Their final movie together was Hollywood or Bust. By that point, whatever warmth had once existed between them was badly damaged, and the production became an uncomfortable experience. After filming, they still had previously scheduled appearances to complete at New York's Copacabana. Those engagements became their farewell. On July 24, 1956, exactly 10 years after their partnership had begun at the 500 Club, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis performed together for the final time. Then it was over. One of the most successful comedy partnerships in American entertainment had collapsed. For 10 years, Jerry Lewis had always had Dean beside him. Martin provided the calm that made Jerry's chaos funnier. He was the straight man, the singer, the target, and the partner Lewis could constantly bounce against. Suddenly, Lewis had none of that. And despite his reputation as the more talented half of the duo, the breakup badly shook his confidence. Lewis now faced a frightening question. Could Jerry Lewis actually succeed without Dean Martin? The answer began arriving almost by accident. Not long after the split, Lewis and his wife were vacationing in Las Vegas when he received an unexpected call. Judy Garland was scheduled to perform, but she had developed strep throat and couldn't go on. Her husband and manager, Sid Luft, needed someone who could step into the spotlight at the last minute. He called Jerry Lewis. For a performer who had spent a decade depending on the chemistry of a partnership, walking onto that stage alone was terrifying. Lewis reportedly had serious doubts about whether audiences would accept him without Martin. But there was no Dean anymore. There was nowhere to hide and nobody else to carry part of the show. Jerry Lewis had to walk onto that stage alone, and the opportunity he initially feared would become exactly what he needed to prove that Martin and Lewis might be finished. But Jerry Lewis was not. The reaction to Jerry Lewis's first major solo performance in Las Vegas was overwhelming. The audience didn't merely accept him without Dean Martin. They embraced him. For a performer who had spent 10 years wondering whether his success depended on his partner, that response gave Lewis exactly what he needed, proof that he could survive on his own. He quickly turned that momentum into a new career. Lewis recorded several of the songs he had performed in Las Vegas, which helped earn him a recording contract. He also began appearing regularly at the Sands Hotel and Casino, establishing the solo nightclub performances that would remain an important part of his career for decades. Jerry Lewis was no longer simply the frantic half of Martin and Lewis. He was a star in his own right. Television specials followed, and between 1956 and 1959, Lewis hosted the Academy Awards 3 times. Paramount also remained committed to him after the breakup, allowing Lewis to continue making films without Martin. Then, in 1959, Lewis signed a remarkable new contract with Paramount. The agreement gave him an extraordinary degree of creative control over his movies, while reportedly making him the highest-paid performer in Hollywood at the time. Lewis suddenly had something most actors could only dream of: power, and he intended to use it. In 1960, a scheduling problem at Paramount gave him the opportunity to prove just how much he could accomplish with that freedom. Lewis had already completed Cinderfella, which was originally expected to receive a summer release. Paramount instead decided that the movie would perform better during the Christmas season. That decision left an unexpected hole in the studio's summer schedule. Paramount needed another Jerry Lewis movie, and they needed it quickly. Lewis responded with The Bellboy. It was an extraordinary undertaking. He starred in the film, directed it, co-wrote it, and produced it, all while working under an extremely compressed schedule. During the day, Lewis filmed the movie. At night, he continued performing live. There simply wasn't enough time for a conventional production, so Lewis designed the movie around the problem. Rather than building The Bellboy around lengthy dialogue scenes, he relied heavily on physical comedy. His character barely spoke, allowing Lewis to shoot sequences quickly and focus on visual gags. But his most important innovation happened behind the camera. Lewis began using video monitors on set so he could immediately review what had just been filmed. Traditionally, directors often had to wait for processed footage before knowing exactly how a scene looked. Lewis wanted immediate feedback. If something was wrong, he could see it and shoot the scene again while everything was still in place. Versions of this technique would eventually become standard throughout filmmaking. Paramount, however, wasn't initially impressed with the movie itself. Executives reportedly worried that Lewis had essentially delivered something resembling a modern silent comedy, and the studio withdrew its financial support. Lewis believed in the project strongly enough to put up his own money to complete it. This time, the gamble paid off. The Bellboy became a commercial success and eventually developed into one of Lewis's best-known films. More importantly, it confirmed that Jerry Lewis wasn't merely an actor performing someone else's material. He wanted control over the entire process. From that point forward, he frequently became involved in writing, producing, directing, or some combination of all 3. Professionally, Jerry Lewis had successfully escaped Dean Martin's shadow. Personally, escaping their history was much harder. Lewis later said that he and Martin barely communicated privately for roughly 20 years after their breakup, something he deeply regretted. There were occasional public encounters, but the emotional distance between them remained. Then Frank Sinatra decided to interfere. In 1976, Lewis was hosting his annual Labor Day telethon for the Muscular Dystrophy Association when Sinatra appeared on stage. Sinatra told Lewis he had brought along a friend. Then Dean Martin walked out. Lewis appeared stunned. The audience erupted as the former partners embraced, producing one of the most famous reunion moments in television history. Two men who had once been inseparable, then spent 2 decades largely apart, were suddenly standing beside each other again. At least with Dean Martin, Lewis eventually found some degree of reconciliation. His relationship with his own family would prove far more painful. Lewis remained married to Patty Palmer for nearly 4 decades, despite a marriage troubled by his admitted infidelities and long absences. Eventually, Patty reached her limit. In 1980, she filed for divorce. Around the same period, Lewis met Sandy Pitnick, a professionally trained dancer who appeared in a small role in his film Hardly Working. Their relationship developed while his first marriage was ending, and Lewis and Pitnick eventually married in February 1983. Years later, they adopted a daughter, Danielle. Lewis had begun another family. But according to several of his sons, his relationship with the family he left behind deteriorated dramatically. By then, mortality had already given Lewis several warnings. His first heart attack came in 1960 when he was only 34 years old. He suffered another serious cardiac episode in 1982 and another heart attack in 2006. Lewis continued working despite years of health problems, ultimately living far longer than some might have expected. On August 20th, 2017, Jerry Lewis died at the age of 91. His death produced an enormous wave of tributes. Comedians, actors, filmmakers, and fans celebrated a performer who had helped reshape American comedy and had influenced filmmaking both in front of and behind the camera. But his death also reopened another story, the story of Jerry Lewis as a father. Lewis and Patty Palmer had raised 6 sons together, yet when his will became public, it contained a decision that shocked many people. Lewis explicitly excluded his sons and their descendants from inheriting through his estate, while his widow Sandy remained his primary beneficiary. For a family whose relationship had already been fractured for decades, the message felt final. After Lewis died, some of his children began describing what growing up with the famous comedian had actually been like. His youngest biological son, Anthony Lewis, described his father as unpredictable. The children, he said, could never be certain which version of Jerry Lewis would walk through the door. Anthony characterized aspects of his father's behavior as emotionally abusive, yet even Anthony's feelings were complicated. Despite the painful memories, he still carried some affection for his father. Not all of Jerry Lewis's sons felt the same way. Because behind the movies, the telethons, the innovations, and the laughter was a family that had experienced Jerry Lewis very differently from the millions of people who adored him. And once their father was gone, some of them were finally ready to tell their side of the story. Anthony Lewis's memories of his father were painful, but his older brother Gary went even further. Gary Lewis described Jerry as a mean and evil man and claimed that his father rarely showed genuine love toward his children. For Gary, the comedian adored by millions was almost unrecognizable from the father he remembered at home. The laughter audiences associated with Jerry Lewis stood in sharp contrast to the resentment some members of his own family carried long after childhood. And the controversy surrounding Lewis didn't end with his family. In 2022, Vanity Fair published an investigation in which several women who had worked with Lewis during the height of his movie career accused him of sexual harassment, verbal mistreatment, and, in some accounts, sexual assault. The allegations emerged years after Lewis's death, meaning he was unable to respond to them, and they have not resulted in criminal proceedings. Those accounts added another troubling layer to an already complicated legacy. Because Jerry Lewis remains difficult to reduce to either a hero or a villain. Whatever people believe about the man himself, his impact on comedy is impossible to ignore. Lewis embraced a frantic, physical, almost cartoon-like style at a time when much mainstream comedy was considerably more restrained. He wasn't afraid to look ridiculous, destroy the rhythm of a scene, distort his voice, twist his body, or push a joke far beyond what audiences expected. That willingness to take risks influenced generations. Comedians including Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, and Jim Carrey emerged in a comedy landscape Lewis had helped reshape. After Lewis died, Carrey praised his fearless approach, describing the way Lewis stretched reality through comedy as something almost anarchic. And perhaps that contradiction is what makes Jerry Lewis's stories so fascinating. He could make an entire room laugh while people inside his own home remembered pain. He could be remarkably innovative behind the camera while former colleagues later described disturbing behavior away from it. He devoted decades to entertaining audiences and raising enormous amounts of money through his telethons, yet some of his own children believed he had failed them in the most basic role of all, being their father. Jerry Lewis died as one of the most influential comedians of the 20th century. But after the applause stopped, the people closest to him told a much darker story. So what do you think? Can someone's artistic legacy be separated from the way they treated the people around them? And how do you remember Jerry Lewis? As a comedy pioneer, a deeply flawed man, or somehow both? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel for more stories about Hollywood's biggest legends, and share your thoughts on who we should cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.